The invitation sat on my kitchen counter, unopened. I already knew what it said. The elegant cream envelope with my grandmother's address embossed in gold in the corner. Inside was an invitation to her 80th birthday celebration, a milestone I wouldn't be allowed to attend. My phone buzzed for the 5th time. Mom again. Just remember what we agreed. Stay away from the party. It's for her own good. I crushed the envelope in my fist, tears blurring my vision. 3 days later, I received a different kind of message. Grandma Helen had collapsed during her birthday dinner. By the time I reached the hospital, there was nothing but whispers and averted gazes. The lawyer called me the next morning. "You'll need to be at the reading," he said quietly. She was very specific about that. My name is Olivia Barrett, and this is the story of how my grandmother's final act of love exposed decades of family, secrets that no one was prepared to face. The hospital corridor seemed endless, my footsteps echoing against sterile walls as I rushed toward the ICU. My chest burned with each breath, lungs desperate for air that wouldn't come. I hadn't slept since receiving my sister's text, the only one in the family who still spoke to me. Grandma Helen collapsed. It's bad. Come now. The waiting room was crowded with relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles, all wearing their Sunday best, as if they'd come straight from the birthday celebration I'd been forbidden to attend. My mother stood by the window, her back to the door, shoulders rigid beneath her expensive silk blouse. She didn't turn when I entered, though I knew she heard me. No one spoke to me. No one made eye contact. Dr. Abernathy appeared through double doors, his face grave. He spoke softly, words I couldn't fully process. Massive stroke. Nothing we could do. Passed peacefully. The room erupted in wails and sobs, but I stood frozen, unable to cry, unable to move. I'd been banned from saying goodbye while she was alive, and now it was too late. My sister Zoe slipped her hand into mine, a small act of rebellion in a room full of people who had chosen sides long ago. "She asked for you," she whispered. "At the party before it happened, she kept looking at the door. Something cracked inside me then, a fault line splitting open. I turned and walked out, past my mother who finally looked up, past the relatives, who had helped enforce my exile, past the nurse who called after me. In the parking lot, rain fell in sheets, soaking through my clothes as I screamed into the empty space where my grandmother's love had been. 3 days passed in a fog of grief and rage. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, sleeping in short, violent bursts, waking to the same hollow reality. Grandma Helen was gone, and I hadn't been there to hold her hand, to tell her one last time that I loved her, to thank her for being the only person who truly saw me. The call came on Wednesday morning, a steady voice identifying himself as James Preston, Helen Barrett's attorney. "Ms. Barrett, I need you to come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. for the reading of your grandmother's will." "There must be some mistake," I said, throat raw from days of crying. "My family won't want me there." "This isn't about what they want," he replied, and something in his tone made me sit straighter. "Your grandmother was very specific. All beneficiaries must be present or the reading cannot proceed. That includes you." I pulled into the law office parking lot 20 minutes early, hands trembling against the steering wheel. Through the tinted windows, I could see figures already gathered in the conference room, the familiar silhouettes of my family. My mother's perfectly coiffed hair, my father's broad shoulders, Cousin Rebecca twirling a strand of blonde hair around her finger the way she always did when nervous. I almost drove away, almost convinced myself that whatever inheritance Helen might have left me wasn't worth facing the people who had systematically pushed me out of the family over the past 3 years. But something stronger than fear pulled me from the car. Perhaps it was the memory of Helen's voice on the phone the last time we spoke. "Sometimes, Olivia, the truth is all we have left." The receptionist led me down a hallway lined with law books and oil paintings. At the conference room door, I took a deep breath and smoothed my simple black dress, the one Helen had helped me pick out for my first job interview. Armor. Now. Its own way. The conversation inside died as I entered. 9 pairs of eyes tracked my movement to the only empty chair, positioned directly across from my mother. Her lips thinned to a white line, but she said nothing. My father studied his hands, as if they held secrets. Only Zoe offered a small, encouraging smile. James Preston entered last, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He was older than I expected, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him the appearance of a professor rather than an attorney. He nodded to each person before taking his place at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice gentle but authoritative. "We're here today to discuss the last will and testament of Helen Margaret Barrett. Before we begin, I should note that Helen updated her will 6 months ago and was of completely sound mind when she did so. These are her explicit wishes, and under state law, they must be honored." My mother shifted in her seat, crossing her legs. "We understand the legalities, James. Let's proceed." He didn't acknowledge her interruption, instead removing several documents from his portfolio and laying them carefully on the table. Helen was quite specific about how this meeting should be conducted. First, she asked that I distribute these sealed envelopes. Each contains a private message she wrote to the recipient. He moved around the table, placing cream-colored envelopes before each family member. When he reached me, our eyes met briefly, and something like compassion flickered across his face. The envelope he handed me was thicker than the others. "Helen requested that everyone read their letters privately before we continue with the will," Preston said, returning to his seat. "Please take a moment to do so." The room filled with the sound of tearing paper. I ran my finger under the seal of my envelope, heart pounding against my ribs. Inside was a letter written in Helen's unmistakable handwriting. Elegant cursive that slanted slightly to the right, just as she'd taught me when I was a child. "My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, I've left this world, though not before making arrangements to set things right. I know these past years have been unbearable for you. Being cut off from family is its own kind of death, one I've watched you endure with more grace than anyone should have to muster. The truth is a powerful thing, my sweet girl. It can hurt and heal in equal measure. What happened to you? The lies, the exclusion, the cruel choice your mother forced on the family? None of it was your fault. None of it was deserved. I've enclosed something with this letter. Evidence I've been collecting since that terrible Thanksgiving when everything fell apart. Bank statements, photographs, emails. Your mother didn't ban you from my life because of what you said at that dinner. She banned you because of what you almost discovered. Victoria has been embezzling from the family business for nearly 15 years. The documents prove it all. She's been stealing from me, from your father, from the company your grandfather built from nothing. When you started working in the accounting department and mentioned those accounting irregularities, she panicked. It was easier to paint you as unstable, jealous, troubled, than to risk exposure. Forgive me for not standing against her sooner. Fear and old age made me a coward until now. But in death, I finally found the courage that you've shown every day since they pushed you out. The will my attorney is about to read will change everything. The truth will finally be known, and you, my brave Olivia, will be vindicated. Some will hate you more for it. Others will beg forgiveness they haven't earned. Remember that you owe them nothing. Not your forgiveness, not your love, not even your presence. Whatever you choose to do with this information and whatever comes next, know that I have always been proudest of you. Not because you were perfect, but because when faced with injustice, you refused to become unjust. All my love, now and always. Grandma Helen and I looked up from the letter, stunned, to find my mother staring at me, her face drained of color. Her letter lay open before her, a single line visible from where I sat. "I know what you did, Victoria." Around the table, reactions varied. My father looked confused, eyes darting between his letter and my mother. Aunt Susan was openly crying. Uncle Robert crumpled his letter into a tight ball, jaw clenched. Zoe met my gaze, a question in her eyes that I couldn't answer. James Preston cleared his throat. "If everyone has finished reading, we'll proceed with the will itself." I slipped the additional documents from my envelope into my bag, hands trembling. Whatever came next, Grandma Helen had armed me with the truth. For 3 years, I'd believed that my family had turned against me because I'd challenged my mother's authority at a holiday dinner, accused her of controlling behavior, of manipulating. The family, I'd been branded the problem child, the ungrateful daughter, the troublemaker. All because I'd noticed discrepancies in the company books and had the audacity to mention them. Preston adjusted his glasses and began to read. "I, Helen Margaret Barrett, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." What followed was not the simple distribution of assets I'd expected. Instead, it was Helen's final act of justice, carefully orchestrated to expose decades of manipulation and theft. "To my daughter Victoria Barrett Collins," Preston read, his voice steady despite the bomb he was dropping. "I leave the contents of the safe deposit box at First National Bank, box number 7342. The key will be provided following this reading. The contents include copies of all evidence regarding your systematic embezzlement from Barrett Industries, totaling approximately $2.4 million over 15 years. My mother's gasp was audible. Her hand flew to her throat as if to stop the sound. A second copy of this evidence has been provided to my granddaughter, Olivia Barrett. A third copy has been delivered to the district attorney's office, with instructions to proceed with investigation if, and only if, Olivia chooses to pursue charges. The choice of whether justice will be legal or merely familial rests with the person you have most wronged." The room erupted in chaos. My father turned to my mother, his face a mask of betrayal. "Victoria, what is she talking about?" My mother stood abruptly, pointing at me. "This is clearly Olivia's doing. She's poisoned Mom against us, fed her these delusions." "That's enough, Victoria." My father's voice cracked like a whip. "Helen wouldn't make these accusations without proof." Preston continued reading as if no interruption had occurred. "To my granddaughter Olivia Barrett, I leave controlling interest in Barrett Industries, effective immediately. The company your grandfather built has been mismanaged long enough. Additionally, I leave her my house on Maple Street and its contents, as well as the sum of $5 million to be transferred immediately." The words hung in the air like smoke. I couldn't process them, couldn't comprehend the magnitude of what Helen had done. She hadn't just given me an inheritance. She'd given me back my reputation, my place in the world she'd helped shape. "Remainder of my estate," Preston continued, "is to be divided as follows." I didn't hear the rest. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears as I looked around the table at the family who had discarded me. Some faces showed shock, others rage. A few, like Zoe's, a complicated mix of relief and regret. My mother's voice cut through the noise in my head. "This is preposterous. I'll contest it. Helen was clearly not in her right mind." Preston closed the portfolio with deliberate care. "You can certainly try, Mrs. Collins. However, in addition to the considerable evidence of your financial crimes, I have extensive documentation of Helen's mental competency, including evaluations from 3 separate specialists conducted just weeks ago. I would advise against that course of action." He turned to me, extending a small brass key. "Ms. Barrett, this belongs to you now. The deed to the house, banking information, and company documents will be available for you this afternoon." I took the key, its weight somehow anchoring me to this impossible moment. 3 years of exile, of doubting myself, of rebuilding a life alone, had culminated in this revelation. The grandmother who couldn't protect me in life had found a way to do so in death. As I stood to leave, my mother stepped into my path, her perfect facade crumbling. "You can't do this. You can't take everything from me." I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. Behind the anger, I saw fear. Behind the entitlement, desperation. For a moment, I felt nothing but pity. "I'm not taking anything from you, Mom," I said quietly. "You did that yourself, long before today." I walked out of the conference room, Zoe's footsteps quick behind me. In the parking lot, rain had given way to weak sunshine breaking through clouds. I tilted my face toward the light, feeling the warmth on my skin. "Olivia, wait," Zoe called. "What are you going to do?" I turned to my sister, the key still clutched in my palm. "I don't know yet, but for the first time in 3 years, I get to decide." Sorting through Grandma Helen's kitchen felt like archaeology. Each drawer a time capsule, each cabinet a museum of her life. I found recipe cards with notes in the margins. "Olivia loves this with extra cinnamon," and birthday cards. I'd made her over the years, preserved in plastic sleeves. She'd kept everything. 3 weeks had passed since the will reading, and I still hadn't fully processed what happened. The family had fractured along new fault lines, with accusations flying, alliances shifting, and lawyers circling like vultures. But here in her house, my house now, the chaos seemed distant, muffled by the walls that had witnessed 60 years of Barrett family history. My name is Olivia Barrett, and wherever you found this video, I want you to know that family betrayal leaves scars that never fully fade. Being cut off by the people who should love you unconditionally creates a unique kind of pain, one that makes you question not just them, but yourself. Was I really the problem? Did I deserve this exile? These questions haunted me for 3 years while my grandmother watched, collected evidence, and planned her final act of justice. This is the story of how I lost my family, found the truth, and learned that sometimes the strongest blood ties are the ones that get severed. The morning light spilled through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the worn hardwood floor of Grandma Helen's bedroom. I sat cross-legged beside her closet, surrounded by shoe boxes filled with photographs, letters, and mementos spanning nearly 8 decades of life. The scent of her lavender perfume still lingered, growing fainter with each passing day. I traced my fingers over a photo of her as a young woman, standing proudly in front of Barrett Industries in 1962, her husband's arm around her waist, their future stretching before them like an open road. "You always were the sentimental one," a voice said from the doorway. I looked up to find my sister Zoe leaning against the frame, 2 mugs of coffee in her hands. She crossed the room and sat beside me, offering one of the cups. "Found anything? Interesting?" "Everything and nothing," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Mostly just her. Little pieces of her life." Zoe picked up a photograph of all of us at a long-ago summer barbecue, before the fractures, before the accusations. We were all smiling, even Mom. "Hard to believe we were ever this family," she said softly. The weeks since the will reading had been a blur of legal meetings, tearful confrontations, and stunned silences. Mom had retreated to the family lake house, refusing to speak to anyone except her lawyer. Dad oscillated between rage at her deception and grief over the collapse of their 40-year marriage. The extended family had divided into camps, those who believed Helen's accusations and those loyal to Victoria regardless of evidence. Zoe was one of the few who had reached out, tentatively at first, then with growing conviction. She'd been caught in the middle when I was excommunicated, old enough to question our mother's version of events, but too financially dependent to openly defy her. Now, at 25, she was making her own choices. "Are you really going to take over the company?" she asked, setting her mug on the floor beside her. I sighed. leaning back against the bed. I don't know. I was in accounting, not management. I'm not sure I even want to keep it. But it's your birthright, Zoe protested. Grandpa built that company from nothing. It should stay in the family. The family? I repeated, the word feeling strange on my tongue. Which part of the family are we talking about? The part that believed I was mentally unstable when I questioned Mom's accounting? The cousins who blocked my phone number? The uncles and aunts who pretended not to see me at the grocery store? Zoe flinched. We were wrong. I was wrong. I softened, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes. You were 19, Zoe, and Mom is persuasive. That's generous. She picked at a loose thread on her jeans. Have you looked at those documents yet? The ones Grandma Helen left about Mom's embezzlement? I nodded toward my laptop on the bedside table. I spent all night going through them. It's worse than I thought. She wasn't just skimming from the company. She was falsifying Dad's signatures, manipulating board votes, hiding losses. Are you going to go to the police? The question hung between us, heavy with implications. Helen had given me that power. The choice to pursue criminal charges or handle things privately. Either way, our mother's reputation was destroyed. The only question was whether she would also lose her freedom. I haven't decided, I admitted. Part of me wants justice, wants her to face consequences beyond just family shame. But another part still hopes for reconciliation. Zoe finished for me, understanding in her eyes. I laughed bitterly. Pathetic, right? After everything she did, some childish part of me still wants my mom. Zoe squeezed my hand. That's not pathetic. That's human. We sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the relics of our grandmother's life. Through the open window came the sounds of suburban morning, a lawnmower rumbling, children's voices, calling to each other, a dog barking in the distance. Normal life continuing while mine remained suspended in this strange limbo. You know, Zoe said eventually, you never really told me what happened that night. I mean, I was there for the Thanksgiving blow-up, but not for whatever came after. I took a deep breath, memories rushing back like a tide I couldn't stop. You were back at college. It was 3 days after Thanksgiving. I'd been working late at the office, trying to make sense of these expense reports that didn't add up. The numbers were all wrong. Huge consulting fees to companies that didn't exist, travel expenses for trips that never happened. I called Mom, thinking maybe she could explain. And? She told me to mind my own business, said I didn't understand how executive accounting worked, but something in her voice scared me. So I dug deeper. I paused, remembering the sickening feeling as realization dawned. I found a trail leading to offshore accounts, dummy corporations, systematic fraud going back years. When I confronted her again, with evidence this time, everything changed. Zoe nodded slowly. That's when she started telling everyone you were having a breakdown. First it was stress, then depression. Then increasingly bizarre accusations that I was jealous of her position in the company, that I wanted to take over, that I was fabricating evidence to make her look bad. The old anger resurfaced, making my voice shake. By Christmas, the family thought I needed psychological help. By New Year's, I was uninvited from family gatherings. By February, Mom had convinced the board to fire me for my own good. I remember Dad calling me at school, Zoe said quietly, telling me not to engage with you because it might feed your delusions. God, Olivia, I'm so sorry. I shrugged, the pain old but still sharp. Everyone believed her. Everyone except Grandma Helen. Helen always saw through Mom's bullshit, Zoe said with a sad smile. But I didn't understand why she didn't speak up then, why she waited until she was dead, I finished. I wondered that too. The letter explained some of it. Fear, old age. But I think there was more. I reached for a small leather journal tucked among the shoeboxes. I found this yesterday. It's her diary from the last 2 years. I opened to a page marked with a ribbon. Listen to this entry from last April. Confronted Victoria today about what she's done to Olivia. Threatened to expose her if she doesn't make things right. She laughed, actually laughed, and reminded me that no one would believe an old woman with memory issues over the respected CEO. Then she suggested, it might be time to discuss care options for me. I recognized the threat for what it was. If I push too hard now, I'll lose what little power I have. Better to plan, to gather irrefutable evidence, to ensure that when I speak, it cannot be dismissed. Patience has never been my virtue, but for Olivia, I will learn it. Zoe's eyes had filled with tears. She was protecting herself so she could protect you. I nodded, running my fingers over Helen's handwriting. She was playing the long game. And now? And now you have to decide what to do with the power she gave you, Zoe said. The doorbell rang, startling us both. I glanced at my watch. 10 a.m. exactly. That's probably James Preston. We're meeting about the company transition. Zoe stood, offering her hand to pull me up. Want me to stay? I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, whatever comes next. I don't want to face it alone anymore. We made our way downstairs, past walls lined with family photographs chronicling decades of Barrett history. I paused at one taken at my college graduation, Helen beaming proudly beside me, my parents flanking us, everyone smiling for the camera. The perfect family portrait hiding so many cracks beneath its glossy surface. James Preston stood on the porch, briefcase in hand, looking much as he had at the will reading, composed, professional, but with that same hint of compassion in his eyes. Ms. Barrett, he said, nodding formally as I opened the door. And Ms. Collins. Good morning to you both. Please, come in, I said, leading him to the kitchen where morning light streamed through windows overlooking Helen's carefully tended garden. Can I offer you coffee? That would be lovely, he replied, setting his briefcase on the table and taking a seat. His eyes swept over the room, taking in the half-filled moving boxes, the stacks of papers, the general disarray of a life, being sorted. How are you settling in? It's a process, I admitted, pouring him a cup. But it feels right, being here, like she's still watching over things. He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. Helen loved this house. She was very clear that it should go to you. Said you were the only one who would preserve its character rather than seeing it as a real estate opportunity. The comment stung, though I knew it was true. My mother had been pushing Helen to sell for years, arguing that the 4-bedroom Victorian was too much for an aging widow. In reality, the property's rising value in the gentrifying neighborhood had been the motivating factor. Mr. Preston, I began, sitting across from him. Before we discuss business, I need to ask, how long did you know about what my mother was doing? He considered the question carefully, hands wrapped around the warm mug. I had suspicions for some time. Helen began consulting me about irregularities in the company finances approximately 2 years ago, but concrete evidence only emerged in the last 8 months. And you never thought to go to the authorities? Zoe asked, an edge to her voice. It wasn't my place, he replied calmly. Helen was my client. My duty was to advise her of her options and respect her decisions. She was adamant that the resolution should come through her will, that you should be the one to decide the consequences. He turned to me, expression serious. Which brings us to the matter at hand. Have you made a decision about Barrett Industries? I exchanged a glance with Zoe. I'm still considering my options. Taking over as CEO seems premature. I don't have the experience. That's understandable, Preston said, opening his briefcase and removing several documents. Helen anticipated your hesitation. She proposed an alternative structure. You would assume the role of chairperson of the board, with authority to appoint a new CEO. This would give you control without the day-to-day operational responsibilities. Relief washed over me. That sounds more manageable. Additionally, he continued, she recommended this candidate as interim CEO. He slid a folder across the table. I opened it to find a detailed resume for Jonathan Chen, a seasoned executive, with impressive credentials in the manufacturing sector. Attached was a handwritten note from Helen. Jonathan is trustworthy, competent, and has no ties to Victoria. I've vetted him thoroughly. He can steady the ship while you find your footing. Always thinking 3 steps ahead, I murmured, scanning the resume. It was her gift. Preston agreed with a small smile. There's one more thing. He removed a sealed envelope from his briefcase. Helen asked me to give you this 1 month after the will reading, not before. Today marks exactly 1 month. The envelope was heavy, sealed with wax impressed with Helen's distinctive HB monogram. My name was written across the front in her elegant script. Do you know what's in it? I asked, turning it over in my hands. Preston shook his head. She prepared it privately. I only know she considered it important that you receive it now, after you've had time to process everything else. I broke the seal carefully and removed a short letter along with what appeared to be old newspaper clippings and a small photograph. Dearest Olivia, by now, you've had time to think, to feel, perhaps even to begin healing. You faced the family and weathered their reactions to the truth. Some will have approached you with genuine remorse, others with calculated self-interest, still others with hardened hearts. I give you this final piece of our family history not to cause more pain, but to help you understand Victoria. Understanding is not the same as forgiveness. That remains your choice alone. The enclosed article from 1975 details the bankruptcy of my husband's first company, Barrett Manufacturing. What it doesn't tell is how that failure nearly destroyed him. How close. We came to losing everything. Victoria was 12 that year, old enough to understand poverty, young enough to be permanently marked by fear. The small photo shows Victoria as I remember her before that fall, open, trusting, unafraid. The girl she was before scarcity tattooed its lessons on her heart. This doesn't excuse what she's done, but perhaps it explains the obsession with financial control, the desperation to accumulate, the fear of having enough taken away. Whatever you decide about the company, about pressing charges, about reconciliation, do it with open eyes and complete knowledge. Family legacies run deeper than we know, and patterns repeat unless consciously broken. Choose wisdom over vengeance, courage over comfort, but most of all, choose the future you want, not the past you've endured. All my love, now and still, Grandma Helen. I stared at the small photograph she'd enclosed, a young girl with my mother's features but none of her hardness, laughing at the camera, innocent in a way I'd never known her to be. The accompanying news clipping detailed the sudden collapse of Barrett Manufacturing amid allegations of mismanagement, with a photo of my grandfather looking defeated outside bankruptcy court. She wanted me to see Mom as human, I said softly, passing the items to Zoe. Flawed, damaged, but human. Does it change anything for you? Zoe asked, studying the old photograph. I considered the question, feeling the weight of decisions still to come. It changes how I understand her. Whether it changes what I do next? I looked up at Preston, who had been waiting patiently. I think I'm ready to talk about those next steps now. He nodded, spreading the company documents across the table. Then let's begin. Growing up as Victoria Barrett's daughter meant living. In the shadow of expectations so high they blocked out the sun. Our family home wasn't just a house. It was a showpiece, a restored colonial on 3 manicured acres in Westchester County where everything had to be perfect, especially the children. Mom ran our lives like she ran Barrett Industries, with precision, control, and an obsession with appearances. A Barrett never shows weakness, she'd remind me whenever I cried. A Barrett always excels, she'd say when my A- wasn't good enough. A Barrett protects the family name above all else, she'd whisper like a prayer. Dad existed in her orbit, a successful lawyer who somehow never challenged her authority at home. He was kind but distant, retreating to his study most evenings with a scotch and legal briefs, leaving us in Mom's carefully manicured world. My sister Zoe found her escape through charm and social prowess. She became the golden child, the one who intuitively understood the unwritten rules. I was the problem, the one who asked inconvenient questions, who couldn't hide my discomfort with the family mythology. Grandma Helen was my refuge, the only one who seemed to see through the performance to the frightened people beneath. Your mother wasn't always this way, she once told me, stroking my hair as I cried after a particularly brutal dressing down over a B in chemistry. Fear changes people, Olivia. Remember that. The kitchen of Grandma Helen's house, my house, now bore little resemblance to the sterile perfection of my childhood home. Here, cabinets displayed mismatched mugs collected from travels, refrigerator magnets held children's artwork spanning generations, and a wooden table bore the marks of countless family meals. As I ran my fingers over a heart I'd carved into its corner at age 9, earning a rare scolding from Helen, memories flooded back. Sunday afternoons baking cookies, teenage confidences whispered over hot chocolate. The Christmas Eve when I announced I was changing my major from business to accounting, and Mom had stormed out while Helen simply asked thoughtful questions about my decision. Zoe sat across from me, flipping through old photo albums we'd discovered in the attic. God, look at Mom in this one, she said, turning the book so I could see. She actually looks relaxed. The photograph showed Victoria in her 20s, hair loose around her shoulders, laughing on a beach with Dad before they were married. She looked like a different person, unguarded, joyful, her arm thrown casually around his waist. I can't remember ever seeing her like that, I admitted, studying the image. By the time I was old enough to notice, she was already the Ice Queen, Zoe supplied with a sad smile. The nickname had followed our mother for years, whispered by employees, muttered by relatives, even once accidentally used to her face by a new in-law who hadn't been warned. Victoria Barrett Collins, the flawless CEO with the perfect family and the frozen heart. Do you think she was always headed toward this? I asked, gesturing vaguely toward the documents detailing her crimes that were stacked on Helen's desk. Or was there a turning point? Zoe considered the question, absently twirling a strand of hair around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. I think about that night when I was 15 and you were 17. Remember? That charity gala where Dad's client got drunk and started talking about how close Barrett Industries had come to bankruptcy before we were born? I nodded slowly. Mom practically dragged him out of the building. And when we got home, she locked herself in the bathroom for hours. I could hear her crying through the door. Zoe closed the album. That was the first time I realized there was something beneath the perfect surface, something scared. But that doesn't explain stealing millions from your own family company, I countered, the anger I'd been trying to process surging again. That doesn't explain destroying my reputation, turning the family against me, banning me from Helen's life. No, Zoe agreed softly. Nothing explains that. I'm just trying to understand how we got here. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at Helen's garden where early summer flowers were beginning to bloom. 3 weeks ago, Helen had been alive, planning her birthday celebration, a milestone I'd been forbidden to attend. Now she was gone. Her house was mine, and the family I'd grown up in had fractured beyond recognition. I started at Barrett Industries right out of college, I said, still facing the garden. Remember? Mom didn't want me to. She said I should spread my wings somewhere else first. But Dad and Grandma Helen insisted, Zoe recalled. Said it was your birthright. I nodded. I was so eager to prove myself worthy of the Barrett name. I worked twice as hard as anyone else in the accounting department, determined to show I wasn't just there because of nepotism. Which is exactly what Mom accused you of when things went south, Zoe said, anger edging her voice. The irony isn't lost on me. I turned back to face her. I discovered the discrepancies completely by accident. New accounting software flagged some unusual patterns. Consulting fees to companies that had no web presence, no physical address, nothing but a bank account. And when you started asking questions, Mom suggested I was working too hard, said the stress was affecting my judgment. I laughed bitterly. When I kept digging, she told the family I was having some kind of breakdown, fabricating conspiracies. Zoe winced. I remember her calling me at school. She was so convincing. Said you'd always been highly strung, and we needed to present a united front for your own good. A classic Victoria move, I said, the old hurt rising like bile. She could make anything sound reasonable, even cutting off her own daughter. We fell silent, the weight of those years of estrangement heavy between us. Outside, a cardinal landed on the bird feeder Helen had installed, its bright red plumage stark against the green backdrop of the garden. What did Helen say when you told her about the discrepancies? Zoe asked finally. I smiled despite myself. She said, keep records of everything, Olivia. The truth needs evidence to survive. I didn't understand then that she was already suspicious, that she'd been watching Mom for years. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. We exchanged glances. We weren't expecting anyone. Albar. Get it, Zoe offered, rising from the table. Through the kitchen window, I caught sight of a familiar silver Mercedes in the driveway. My stomach dropped. I knew that car as well as I knew my own name. Mom's here, I called, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Zoe froze halfway to the door. Do you want me to send her away? I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the counter. 3 years of exile. 3 years of being labeled unstable, of being the family pariah. And now she was on my doorstep. No, I said finally. Let her in. It's time we talked. Victoria Barrett Collins stood in Helen's entryway like a visitor from another world. Designer suit perfectly tailored, not a hair out of place, posture rigid with practiced dignity. At 58, she was still striking, her features sharp and elegant, her presence commanding. But today, something was different. There were shadows beneath her expertly applied makeup, a tightness around her mouth that spoke of sleepless nights. Olivia, she said, my name formal on her lips. Thank you for seeing me. This is my home now, I replied, the words carrying more weight than I'd intended. Helen wanted me to have it. She flinched almost imperceptibly. Yes. Well, that's partly why I'm here. Zoe hovered uncertainly in the doorway to the living room. Should I go? Stay, I said, not taking my eyes off our mother. Whatever needs to be said can be said in front of both of us. Victoria's gaze flickered to Zoe, something like hurt crossing her features before the mask slipped back into place. As you wish. May I sit down? I gestured to the living room. We arranged ourselves awkwardly. Victoria perched on the edge of an armchair. Zoe and I on the sofa across from her. The coffee table between us might as well have been an ocean. I've spoken with my attorney, Victoria began, her voice carefully controlled. The evidence Helen collected is comprehensive. Contesting the will would be futile and would only create more public scandal. Is that what you're worried about? I asked incredulously. The scandal? Among other things. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. The board has asked for my resignation, effective immediately. Your father has filed for divorce. The family. She trailed off, for once seeming at a loss for words. The family is finally seeing the truth, I finished for her. Victoria's composure cracked slightly, her hands clasping together so tightly her knuckles whitened. I didn't come here to fight, Olivia. I came to acknowledge what I've done to you. The lies I told, the way I turned everyone against you. You destroyed my life, I said, the words burning my throat. You made me doubt my own sanity. You took away my family, my career, everything I'd ever worked for. And why? Because I stumbled onto your theft? She looked down at her clasped hands. It wasn't that simple. Then explain it to me, I demanded, leaning forward. Make me understand. How a mother does that to her own daughter. Victoria was silent for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its practiced polish. It started small. A temporary solution during a cash flow problem. The company was struggling, but I couldn't let anyone know. Not the board, not your father, especially not Helen. We had already survived one near bankruptcy under your grandfather. I couldn't be the one who let Barrett Industries fail. So you stole from it instead, Zoe said flatly. Victoria's eyes flashed with a glimpse of her old authority. I borrowed, with every intention of paying it back when things improved. She sighed, the momentary fire extinguished, but they didn't improve, not enough. And once I'd started, it became easier. A little more here, a little more there. I told myself I deserved it for saving the company, for maintaining the family legacy. And when I found out, I pressed. I panicked. For the first time, she met my gaze directly. I knew if it came out, everything would collapse. The company, our standing in the community, the family name. I convinced myself that discrediting you was the only option, that it was for the greater good. The greater good, I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. Was banning me from Helen's birthday party for the greater good too? Keeping me from saying goodbye to the only person who stood by me? Victoria had the grace to look ashamed. That was spite. Pure and simple. She had confronted me, threatened to expose everything if I didn't make things right with you. I was angry, afraid. She paused. I never imagined she would die that night. The D.O. room fell silent. Outside, a lawnmower droned in the distance, a mundane counterpoint to the wreckage of our family playing out in Helen's living room. What do you want from me, Mom? I asked finally, suddenly exhausted. Forgiveness? Understanding? What? I don't know, she admitted, and perhaps it was the first completely honest thing she'd said to me in years. I just know I couldn't stay away any longer. Not after everything that's happened. Zoe shifted beside me, her expression troubled. Have you told Olivia about the district attorney? Victoria's mouth tightened. I was getting to that. I looked, between them, confused. What about the district attorney? He called yesterday, Victoria said, smoothing her skirt again in a nervous gesture. Helen's evidence is in his hands now. He's reviewing it for potential criminal charges, but... She hesitated. He indicated that if you, as the primary victim and new majority shareholder, decided not to pursue charges, the case would likely be handled as an internal company matter. Understanding dawned. So that's why you're really here. You're afraid. I'll send you to prison. No, she said quickly, then reconsidered. Well, yes, I am afraid of that. But that's not the only reason. She reached into her handbag and removed a small velvet pouch. I brought this for you. She placed it on the coffee table between us. After a moment's hesitation, I picked it up and loosened the drawstring. A delicate gold locket fell into my palm. I don't understand, I said, turning it over. Open it, Victoria instructed softly. Inside was a small photograph on one side. Me as a newborn, cradled in Victoria's arms. On the other side, a more recent photo of me at my college graduation. I looked up at her, confused. "I've worn that every day since you were born," she said, touching her collarbone where the necklace would have rested. "Even during these last 3 years, even when I was—" She swallowed hard. "Even when I was destroying your life, I carried you next to my heart." "That's supposed to make it better?" I asked. But the anger I'd been clinging to was beginning to fracture, revealing something more complicated beneath. "No," Victoria said simply. "Nothing makes it better. I just wanted you to know that whatever else I am, thief, liar, terrible mother, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." She stood, smoothing her suit one last time. "That's all I came to say. What happens next is entirely up to you, Olivia. It always has been." She moved toward the door, pausing beside Zoe to brush a strand of hair from her, face in a rare gesture of maternal tenderness. Then she turned back to me, her mask completely fallen away to reveal a woman I barely recognized, vulnerable, aging, afraid. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I am more sorry than you will ever know." As the door closed behind her, I sat clutching the locket, feeling the weight of choices yet to be made. Zoe moved to sit beside me, her shoulder pressed against mine in silent support. "What are you thinking?" she asked after a long moment. I opened the locket again, studying the two images of myself, beginning and becoming, separated by decades yet connected by the woman who had both shaped and shattered me. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that Grandma, Helen was right. Understanding isn't the same as forgiveness, but maybe it's where we have to start." Grandma Helen's study remained exactly as she'd left it. Bookshelves lined with leather-bound classics and dog-eared paperbacks, her reading, glasses still perched on a stack of historical biographies, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the antique desk. Unlike the rest of the house that I'd slowly begun to make my own over the past month, this room I'd preserved like a time capsule. It still smelled like her, a blend of lavender hand cream and the Earl Grey tea she drank each afternoon while reading correspondence. I settled into her desk chair, running my fingers over the worn leather armrests where her hands had rested for decades. The morning sun streamed through lace curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in golden beams. On the wall hung photographs chronicling the Barrett family history. My grandfather in his army uniform, Helen as a young bride, their children, growing up through the decades. Among them was a picture of me at 16, seated beside Helen on this very desk, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. "I miss you," I whispered to the empty room. "I could really use your advice right now." My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan Chen, the interim CEO Helen had recommended. "Board meeting went well. Your proposal for restructuring the accounting department approved unanimously. Call when you can." I smiled, remembering how nervous I'd been presenting my first initiative as chairperson. Jonathan had been my rock through the transition, patient, with my questions, respectful of my ideas despite my relative inexperience. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Zoe poked her head in, still in pajamas despite the late morning hour. "Hey, just checking if you want coffee before I head out. I've got that interview at 11. "Already made some," I replied, gesturing to the mug on the desk. And yes, I remembered. "Your interview? Good luck, though you won't need it. They'd be lucky to have you," she grinned, some of her old confidence returning. After the family implosion, Zoe had moved into the guest room temporarily, needing space from our mother and time to figure out her next steps. With her psychology degree finally put to use, she was interviewing for a counseling position at a youth center. "Thanks for believing in me," she said, lingering in the doorway. Not everyone would after everything that happened. I understood what she meant. Forgiveness hadn't come easily between us. There had been tearful conversations, painful admissions, moments when old hurt threatened to derail our fragile reconnection. But we were rebuilding, day by day. "Helen taught me that," I said, tapping a finger on the photograph of us. She never gave up on people, even when they disappointed her. Zoe nodded, her expression softening at Helen's name. She used to tell me that you were the strongest of all of us, that you had a moral compass that wouldn't break, no matter how much pressure was applied. She said that? I asked, surprised. All the time. Zoe glanced at her watch. I should get ready. There's someone coming to see you at noon, by the way. I let them know you'd be home. Who? I called, but she was already heading down the hallway, humming to herself. I returned to the quarterly reports I'd been reviewing, losing myself in the familiar comfort of numbers and projections. The work grounded me, a constant while so much else in my life remained in flux. The criminal investigation against my mother was proceeding slowly. My father was selling the family home and moving to Arizona, and relatives were still choosing sides in the aftermath. Through it all, Helen's house had become my sanctuary, and Barrett Industries my purpose. At precisely noon, the doorbell chimed. I made my way downstairs, running a hand through my hair and straightening my casual Saturday outfit of jeans and a sweater. When I opened the door, I nearly gasped in surprise. Marcus, my former colleague, stood on the porch, looking much as he had 3 years ago, tall, slim, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. We'd worked together in accounting at Barrett Industries before my exile, becoming close friends despite his initial wariness of the boss's daughter. When I was forced out, he'd been one of the few who'd tried to reach out, though my mother had quickly put a stop to that. Hey, Olivia, he said, a tentative smile crossing his face. It's been a while. 3 years, 2 months, and about 16 days, I replied without thinking, then blushed. I mean, yes, it's been a while. He laughed, the awkwardness between us easing slightly. You always did have a head for numbers. What are you doing here? I asked, suddenly conscious of my casual appearance, the messy bun I'd thrown my hair into, the faded university sweatshirt I wore on weekends. Zoe called me, he admitted. Said it was time I knew the truth about what happened back then. She sent me some of Helen's documentation. He paused, regret etching lines around his eyes. I should have believed you, Liv. I'm so sorry I didn't fight harder to find out what was really going on. I studied his face, searching for ulterior motives, for the calculated interest I'd seen in other former colleagues who'd reached out since the scandal broke. Those suddenly eager to align themselves with the new chairperson. Why now? I asked. Simply? Because I've missed my friend for 3 years, he answered, meeting my gaze steadily. And because I need to apologize for failing you when it mattered most. In the silence that followed, memories cascaded through my mind. Late nights working side by side on audit reports. Marcus bringing me coffee exactly how I liked it. Our inside jokes about the company's archaic filing system. He'd been the first person outside my family I'd trusted with my suspicions about the accounting irregularities, though neither of us had imagined then how high the discrepancies went. I brought you something, he said, reaching into his messenger bag. He pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal and handed it to me. Remember this? I took it carefully, recognition dawning. Our troubleshooting log? He nodded. Every accounting issue we solved together, every system we fixed. I kept it after you left. Thought you might want it back. I opened the journal, flipping through pages filled with both our handwriting. Notes, calculations, the occasional doodle when meetings ran long. In the margins were inside jokes, coffee stains, reminders of the friendship that had sustained me during my early days at the company. I don't know what to say, I admitted, clutching the journal. You don't have to say anything, Marcus replied. Just, maybe we could get coffee sometime, start over as friends? I looked up at him, at the genuine remorse in his eyes, the openness of his expression, the absence of the calculation I'd grown accustomed to seeing in people's faces since Helen's will had made me powerful. I'd like that, I said finally, stepping back from the doorway. But first, would you like to come in? I just made a fresh pot of coffee, and I have a feeling Zoe might have orchestrated this whole thing. He grinned, the familiar smile that had once brightened countless stressful workdays. I'd like that too. And yes, your sister was very strategic about the whole thing. Said something about healing old wounds and rebuilding connections that matter. As he stepped into Helen's house, my house, I felt something shift inside me, like a door long sealed finally creaking open. Not everything that had been broken could be fixed, but perhaps not everything needed to stay broken either. The rain fell in steady sheets against the windows of Barrett Industries headquarters, the gray sky mirroring the mood in the conference room where I sat alone, waiting. The quarterly financial reports spread before me told a story more damning than I'd anticipated. Not just occasional embezzlement, but systematic fraud spanning years. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through the evidence I'd compiled over weeks of late nights and weekends. Spreadsheets, bank statements, transfer records, all pointing to one inescapable conclusion. My mother, Victoria Barrett Collins, CEO and family matriarch, had stolen millions from the company my grandfather had built. The door opened, and she swept in like a force of nature, impeccable in a tailored navy suit, not a hair out of place despite the storm raging outside. She barely glanced at me as she set her briefcase on the table and removed her raincoat. "This better be important, Olivia. I have a board meeting in 40 minutes. Her voice held that familiar edge of impatience she reserved for interruptions to her carefully scheduled day. "It's important," I said, my own voice steadier than I felt. "Please, sit down." Something in my tone must have registered because she paused, studying my face before taking the seat across from me. "What's this about?" I slid the first folder toward her. "I've been reviewing the executive expense accounts and consulting fees for the past 5 years. She made no move to open the folder. "That's not your department." "No, but when the new accounting software flagged unusual patterns, Johnson asked me to look into it. I kept my tone professional, clinical, though my heart hammered against my ribs. At first, I thought it was a glitch in the system. The numbers didn't make sense. "Software glitches happen all the time," she said dismissively. "I'll have IT look into it. It's not a glitch." I opened the folder for her, pointing to the highlighted transactions. "These consulting firms that received over $300,000 last quarter? They don't exist, Mom. No websites, no physical addresses, no registration with the state, just bank accounts." Her expression didn't change, but I noticed her knuckles whitening as she gripped her pen. "You must be mistaken." I wish I was. I pulled out the second folder. So I traced the bank accounts. They all lead back to offshore holdings in the Caymans. "And those holdings?" I met her eyes directly. "They belong to you." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever, broken only by the steady drumming of rain against glass. Outside, her office, the company continued its workday routine. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, lives unfolding in blissful ignorance of the bomb I'd just detonated. "You've been working too hard," she said finally, her voice unnervingly calm. "Taking on too much responsibility too quickly. It's affecting your judgment." "Mom," I said, disbelief coloring my voice. "Did you hear what I just said? I have proof. That you've been embezzling company funds. This isn't about my judgment." She closed the folder with deliberate care, smoothing her hand over its surface as if erasing the evidence inside. "Olivia, you're exhausted. You've been working weekends, staying late. I've been concerned about your stress levels for some time. This isn't about me." I pushed the third folder toward her, frustration mounting. "These are bank records, Mom. Facts. Numbers don't lie." "But people can be mistaken." She stood, gathering the folders into a neat stack. "I think you should take some time off. Clear your head." I stood as well, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not mistaken, and I'm not stressed. I know what I found. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Something shifted in her expression then, the mask of maternal concern giving way to something colder, more calculating. She assessed me as she might a business rival, weighing options, measuring threats. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low. The question caught me off guard. What do I want? I want you to explain this. I want you to make it right. Make it right, she repeated, as if testing the phrase. And if I can't? Then I'll have to take this to the board, to Dad, to Grandma Helen. The names fell between us like stones, each one causing a minute flinch I might have missed if I hadn't been watching so closely. She placed the folders in her briefcase and snapped it shut. I have a board meeting to prepare for. We'll discuss this later when you're thinking more clearly. Mom, you can't just walk away from this. These aren't accusations. They're facts. She paused at the door, turning to face me with an expression I'd never seen before. Something between fear and determination, vulnerability and steel. Facts, she said softly, are often a matter of interpretation. Be careful about the story. You choose to tell, Olivia. Some versions will cost you more than you're prepared to lose. 3 days later, I received a call from my father asking me to come to the house immediately. His voice sounded strained, worried in a way that sent ice through my veins. When I arrived, they were waiting in the formal living room. Mom, Dad, even Zoe, home from college for what my father had described as a family emergency. Mom sat perfectly composed on the sofa, hands folded in her lap. Dad paced by the fireplace, face drawn with concern. Zoe perched nervously on an armchair, shooting me confused glances as I entered. "What's going on?" I asked, remaining standing, when no one offered me a seat. Dad stopped pacing. "Your mother has told us some concerning things, Olivia. About your behavior at work, about these accusations you've been making." "They're not accusations," I said automatically. "I found concrete evidence of embezzlement," my mother finished, her voice gentle with practiced concern. "Conspiracy. Fraud. Yes, she's told us all about her theories." The way she said theories sent a chill down my spine. "Victoria thinks," my father continued carefully, "that you might be experiencing some significant stress. Perhaps even the beginning of a psychological episode." "A psychological episode?" I repeated, looking from one parent to the other in disbelief. "Are you serious right now?" "Sweetheart," my mother said, rising to approach me with outstretched hands. "We're worried about you. These paranoid thoughts, these elaborate conspiracies you're constructing. It's not like you." I stepped back, evading her touch. "The only conspiracy here is the one you've been running for years." "I have proof, Dad," I said, turning to him desperately. "Actual documentation, bank records. She's been stealing from the company." My father's expression was devastating. Not anger or disbelief, but pity. "Olivia, we've spoken to Dr. Rosen. He thinks you might benefit from some time off. Perhaps even a short stay somewhere you can rest, get proper evaluation." "A short stay?" The room seemed to tilt beneath me. "You mean hospitalization? You think I need to be committed because I found evidence that Mom is a thief?" "See how she's escalating?" my mother said softly to my father. "The paranoia, the accusations, just like Rosen described." "I'm not paranoid." My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. "I can show you the evidence. It's all in my office." "We checked your office," my father said, not meeting my eyes. "The financial records you claim to have, they don't exist, Olivia." The floor seemed to drop from beneath me. "That's not possible. I had folders, spreadsheets, bank statements." "What you had," my mother interjected smoothly, "were normal company records that you misinterpreted through the lens of exhaustion and stress. Johnson has already confirmed there were no irregularities in the accounts you flagged." "Johnson," My colleague who had initially asked me to look into the anomalies, who had seemed just as concerned as I was, who reported directly to my mother. I turned to Zoe, a last desperate appeal. Zoe, you know me. You know I wouldn't make this up. My sister looked torn, glancing between our parents and me. I don't know what to think, Liv. Mom showed me the emails you've been sending. They did sound pretty intense. Emails? What emails? I hadn't sent any emails about my findings. I'd been careful to document everything offline until I could confront my mother directly. From your company account, my mother supplied. Increasingly erratic messages about conspiracies, embezzlement, cover-ups. IT recovered them, even though you deleted them. The room spun around me as understanding dawned. You're framing me, I whispered. You're making it look like I'm having some kind of breakdown. We're trying to help you, my father insisted, but doubt had crept into his expression. Victoria, maybe we should look at those records again. She needs help, Richard, my mother cut in firmly. Not indulgence of these delusions. Dr. Rosen said that's the worst thing we could do. I backed toward the door, suddenly understanding the trap closing around me. Dad, please, just look at the evidence yourself. Don't just take her word for it. I've seen enough, he said quietly. The board has agreed to give you a paid leave of absence. Your mother has arranged for a consultation at Lakeside Wellness Center tomorrow morning. A psychiatric facility? My voice broke on the words. You're trying to have me committed because I found out what you've been doing? My mother approached again, her expression a perfect mask of maternal concern. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking we're worried about, sweetheart. No one is trying to have you committed. Lakeside is a voluntary facility. We just want you to get an evaluation, some rest. And if I refuse this voluntary stay? I asked, already knowing the answer. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Then we'd have to consider more formal intervention options, for your own safety. I looked around the room, at my father's conflicted face, Zoe's confused tears, my mother's calculated concern, and realized in that moment that I had already lost. Whatever evidence I'd gathered was gone, replaced by fabricated emails painting me as unstable. My colleagues had been turned against me. My own family was being manipulated into believing I needed psychiatric intervention. In the space of 3 days, my mother had dismantled my credibility entirely. I need some air, I said, moving toward the door. Olivia, please, my father began, but I was already walking out, each step carrying me further from the family that had chosen to believe the worst of me rather than the truth about their matriarch. The driveway, rain still falling around me, I made a decision. There was one person who might still believe me. One person my mother couldn't entirely control. I needed to see Grandma Helen. Helen's garden cottage stood at the far end of her property, a small sanctuary she'd converted from an old groundskeeper's shed into her personal retreat. When I was a child, this place had seemed magical. The walls lined with books, the mismatched furniture draped with colorful throws, the windows overlooking her prized roses. Now, as I sat across from my grandmother in the fading afternoon light, the cottage felt like the last safe harbor in a storm that had swept away everything familiar. She's convinced them I'm having some kind of breakdown, I said, my voice hoarse from explaining the situation. Dad's talking about formal intervention options. Zoe thinks I'm paranoid. They want me to check into a psychiatric facility tomorrow. Helen's face remained calm, though I noticed the tightening around her eyes, the subtle tell she'd had since I was young, the only indication when something truly angered her. And the evidence you collected? Gone, replaced with fake emails, making me sound unhinged. I don't know how she did it so quickly, but I do, Helen said, rising to put the kettle on as if we were discussing something as mundane as the weather. Your mother has been preparing for this possibility for longer than you realize. The moment you joined the accounting department, she must have started contingency planning. I watched her methodical movements, the careful measuring of tea, leaves, the precise arrangement of cups, finding comfort in her steadiness when everything else had become unpredictable. Why would she do this, Grandma? I'm her daughter. Helen's hands paused briefly before resuming their work. Victoria has always feared exposure more than anything else, more than loss, more than loneliness. She poured steaming water over the tea leaves. Even, it seems, more than her own child's well-being. What do I do now? I asked, accepting the cup she offered. If I refuse to go to Lakeside, they could petition for involuntary commitment. If I go, I'm essentially admitting to a breakdown I'm not having, which only reinforces her story. Helen settled back into her chair, studying me over the rim of her teacup. What do you want to do, Olivia? The question caught me off guard. No one had asked what I wanted since this nightmare began. They'd told me what I needed, what was best for me, what would help me get better. But no one had simply asked what I wanted. I want the truth to come out, I said finally. I want her to face consequences for what she's done. I want my family to know that I'm not crazy, that she's been lying to all of us. Helen nodded, setting her cup down with a quiet clink. Then that's what we'll work toward. But it won't happen overnight, and right now, your immediate safety is my concern. She reached across the small table between us, taking my trembling hands in her weathered ones. I think you should leave Westchester, at least temporarily. Leave? And go where? I have a property in Vermont. Small cabin, very private. Few people know about it. I use it when I need to think, to get away from Victoria's intensity. A small, rueful smile crossed her face, which has been more frequent in recent years. The idea of running felt both cowardly and immensely appealing. To escape the suffocating pressure, the gaslighting, the constant defense of my own sanity, even for a short time. What about my job? My apartment? Resign formally, in writing. Make it look like you're taking their advice about stress leave. As for your apartment, take what matters most. Leave the rest. Material things can be replaced. Your well-being cannot. I hesitated, seeing the logical path forward but struggling with its implications. If I go, it looks like I'm guilty, like there really is something wrong with me. Sometimes, Helen said carefully, we must appear to lose a battle in order to win the war. Victoria believes she's won. Let her think that for now. The doorbell of the main house chimed, the sound carrying across the garden to the cottage. Helen frowned, glancing at her watch. I'm not expecting anyone. She moved to the cottage window, pulling back the curtain slightly. Her expression hardened. It's your mother, and your father. My heart lurched painfully against my ribs. They're looking for me. Stay here, Helen instructed, her voice taking on a steel I rarely heard. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. Do you understand? I nodded, throat too tight for words. Helen straightened her cardigan and stepped outside, closing the cottage door firmly behind her. Through the window, I watched her walk the stone path toward the main house, her posture straight despite her 78 years, her pace unhurried. I couldn't see the front door from my vantage point, but I could hear the murmur of voices growing louder as Helen presumably led my parents away from the cottage, toward the house. Minutes stretched painfully as I waited, straining to hear. Finally, raised voices carried across the garden, not clear enough to make out words, but the tone unmistakable. My mother's controlled anger, my father's placating rumble, Helen's voice, suddenly louder and clearer than I'd ever heard it. You will not do this, Victoria. Not to her. Not in my home. The front door slammed. More muffled conversation. Then silence. 10 minutes later, Helen returned to the cottage, her face flushed but composed. She sat heavily in her chair, suddenly, looking every one of her years? What happened? I asked. They wanted to search my property for you. I refused. She picked up her cooling tea, hands steady despite everything. Your mother then suggested that I was enabling your delusions. She threatened to have you both evaluated for shared psychosis. Both of us? I gasped. She's trying to discredit you too? Helen's laugh held no humor. Apparently, I'm showing signs of early dementia, according to Victoria. How convenient that my mental faculties would begin to fail just as you raise concerns. About her financial dealings, the calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. She'd do that to you? Her own mother? Your mother, Helen said quietly, will do whatever she feels necessary to protect herself. I've always known that about Victoria, though I've tried to see the best in her. Today, she showed her true character, not just to me, but to your father as well. Dad? What do you mean? Helen's expression softened slightly. Richard may be many things, weak-willed, conflict-averse, too trusting of his wife. But he is not entirely blind. When Victoria suggested I might need memory care evaluation, he looked shaken. He said nothing in your defense, which is unforgivable, but I saw doubt in his eyes. A sliver of hope pierced the despair that had enveloped me. So he might not completely believe her story. Seeds of doubt have been planted, Helen confirmed, but they'll take time to grow. Right now, Victoria is still controlling the narrative, which is why you need to leave tonight, before she can escalate further. She rose and moved to a small roll-top desk in the corner. From a hidden drawer, she extracted an envelope and a small box. The envelope contains cash, keys to the Vermont cabin, and directions. The box has a prepaid phone, not connected to your regular accounts. She pressed both into my hands. Pack a bag. Take your personal documents. I'll call when it's safe. To return. And the evidence against her? Her embezzlement? Helen's smile was grim but determined. Leave that to me. I may be an old woman supposedly sliding into dementia, but I've been watching Victoria Barrett Collins for much longer than she realizes. The truth has patience, Olivia. Sometimes it waits years to emerge, but emerge it will. I clutched the envelope, feeling both the weight of what I was about to lose and the first stirrings of something that felt dangerously like hope. How will you explain my disappearance? I won't have to, Helen said simply. Victoria will construct a narrative that serves her purposes, perhaps that you've checked yourself into a facility or taken an extended stress leave. Let her tell her story. We'll be writing a different ending altogether. Vermont winters. Demand respect. The cold seeps through walls, finds the smallest cracks in window frames, turns breath to fog and water to ice. In Helen's cabin, I learned the rhythm of survival. Banking the wood stove before sleep, breaking the skin of ice on water buckets each morning, shoveling paths through snow that sometimes fell faster than I could clear it. The isolation should have broken me. Instead, it rebuilt me. 6 months had passed since I'd fled Westchester in the night, leaving behind my apartment, my career, and the family name that had defined me. 6 months of minimal contact with the outside world, just weekly calls. With Helen on the prepaid phone, carefully worded emails from the local library to Marcus, my only ally at Barrett Industries who still believed in my sanity. She's been thorough, Marcus had written in his latest message. Your position filled, your desk cleared. Official story is you've taken indefinite leave for mental health treatment. Most people don't even say your name anymore. The erasure should have hurt more, but distance had provided clarity. Each morning, I woke early and hiked the mountain trail behind the cabin, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold. Each evening, I meticulously documented everything I could remember about the financial irregularities I discovered. Dates, amounts, account numbers, patterns I'd observed. Without access to company records, my notes were incomplete. But They formed the skeleton of the case I hope to someday prove. Helen's most recent call had been different. Instead of our usual careful updates, she'd been direct, almost urgent. "The annual shareholders' meeting is next month," she'd said, her voice crackling over the poor connection. "Victoria will present the financial overview. I've been collecting evidence, Olivia, banking records, transfer authorizations, board minutes that were altered after the fact." "How?" I'd asked, amazed at what my 78-year-old grandmother had managed to accomplish. "I may be old, but I'm still a Barrett, and a majority shareholder who asks pointed questions. People answer, especially when they don't realize what I'm really asking." She'd paused, then continued with characteristic bluntness. "It's time to prepare for your return." Now, sitting at the rough-hewn table in the cabin's main room, I organized the evidence I'd compiled. 6 journals filled with my notes and recollections, a timeline of events leading to my exile, copies of emails exchanged with Helen and Marcus. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough to counter my mother's narrative or prove her crimes, but it was a foundation. The laptop Helen had sent via courier last week sat open before me, the secure email account displaying her most recent message. "Package arriving tomorrow. Legal documents require signature. Prepare carefully. Cryptic, but necessary." We'd learned caution these past months, aware that Victoria might be monitoring Helen's communications. The knock on the cabin door came at precisely 10 a.m. the next morning. The courier required 3 forms of identification before handing over the thick envelope marked with the logo of Preston and Associates, Helen's law firm. Inside was a USB drive, a letter from James Preston, and a sealed envelope with my name, written in Helen's elegant script. Preston's letter was brief and formal. "Ms. Barrett. At the request of Helen Barrett, I am providing the enclosed materials for your review prior to the upcoming proceedings. These documents are considered privileged. Communication. Please maintain strict confidentiality regarding their contents. A car will arrive at your location on March 15th at 6 a.m. to transport you to New York. Appropriate attire has been arranged. You will be briefed further en route. Respectfully, James." Preston, SKI plugged the USB drive into the laptop with trembling fingers. The contents organized neatly into folders: financial records, board minutes, witness statements, legal strategy. As I clicked through the files, my breath caught. Bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts, email chains with dates and headers that proved document manipulation. Most damning of all, a video recording of my mother instructing IT staff to access my company email and clean up some concerning communications. Helen's personal letter explained the rest. "My dearest Olivia, what you're seeing is 6 months of methodical work. While Victoria believed I was quietly accepting her version of events, I was building a case with James Preston's assistance. The evidence is now irrefutable. The annual shareholders' meeting is scheduled for March 16th. Victoria expects to present a glowing financial report, followed by a vote to consolidate her control of the company. What she doesn't expect is your presence, or mine presenting alternative findings. The board has already been privately briefed by James. They've agreed to hear our evidence before voting. Your father will be there. He's seen some of the documentation, and while still processing the betrayal, is no longer under Victoria's influence. Prepare yourself. This will be difficult, public, and necessary. Victoria will fight with everything she has. But truth, as I've always told you, needs only a single crack to break through even the most carefully constructed facade. When you return, do not go to your old apartment or contact anyone outside our trusted circle. Come directly to my house. I've prepared the guest room and secured the property. There have been incidents suggesting Victoria may be aware that her carefully constructed narrative is about to collapse. Bring the journals you've been keeping. Your contemporaneous notes will support the timeline we've established. Wear the outfit that will be delivered tomorrow. Appearances matter in these situations. and we need you to project strength, not victimhood. Rest well these final nights in Vermont. The peace of these mountains has healed you. Now it's time to use that strength to reclaim what's yours. All my love. Grandma Helen. I read the letter twice more, then carefully placed it in my most complete journal. Helen was right. The isolation that had initially felt like punishment had become restoration. Here, stripped of the Barrett name and all its expectations, I'd found my center again, my certainty. The next day, another courier arrived with a garment bag containing a tailored charcoal suit, ivory silk blouse and low heels, professional, understated, nothing like the designer labels my mother favored. Also enclosed was a small jewelry box containing my grandfather's watch, the one he'd worn when founding Barrett Industries. Helen's note simply read, "Time returns to its rightful place." As the date of departure approached, I packed methodically, the journals, the USB drive, personal documents, a few belongings from my months in exile. The rest I left behind. The woman who had arrived here broken and questioning her own reality would not be returning. In her place stood someone steadier, more certain, armored with truth and patience. On my final evening, I hiked to the overlook above the cabin, watching, as the setting sun turned the distant peaks gold, then pink, then deepening blue. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clarifying. Tomorrow would begin the hardest fight of my life, not just to clear my name, but to bring my mother's actions into the light. "I'm ready," I whispered to the mountains that had sheltered me, to the grandmother who had never stopped believing in me, to the self I had reclaimed in this remote sanctuary. The black car arrived in pre-dawn darkness, headlights cutting through swirling snow. The driver, professionally discreet, confirmed my identity and loaded my single suitcase. As we descended the mountain road, I watched the cabin disappear in the rearview mirror, a chapter closing, a necessary refuge now behind me. In the back seat lay a folder I hadn't seen before, marked with James Preston's firm logo. Inside was a detailed agenda for the shareholders' meeting, a seating chart of the boardroom, and a handwritten note. "Stand firm, speak truth, fear nothing." Helen's house looked exactly as I remembered it. The ivy-covered brick, the brass knocker, polished to a warm glow, the stained glass panels in the front door casting jewel-toned light across the entryway. But the woman who greeted me bore little resemblance to the grandmother I'd left behind 6 months ago. Helen had always been elegant, but the steel in her spine was now visible in every aspect of her bearing. "You look well," she said, embracing me tightly. "Stronger." "So do you," I replied, noticing the determined set of her jaw, the clear focus in her eyes. She led me into the study where James Preston waited, surrounded by documents organized in precise stacks. His greeting was formal but warm, his handshake firm. "Everything is prepared," he said, gesturing to the papers. "Victoria has no idea what's coming." The night passed in careful preparation, reviewing statements, memorizing key figures, rehearsing responses to potential challenges. By morning, we were ready. The three of us rode to Barrett Industries headquarters in silence, each lost in private thoughts about the confrontation to come. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. My mother, mid-sentence in what appeared to be her financial presentation, froze at the sight of me. For one unguarded moment, naked fear flashed across her face before her composure returned. "Olivia," she said, recovering quickly. "This is unexpected. I understood you were still receiving treatment." "I'm fully recovered," I replied steadily. "Thank you for your concern." Board members exchanged glances, confusion evident. My father half rose from his seat, indecision written across his features. Before anyone could speak further, Helen stepped forward. "Before this meeting continues, I believe the board should review some critical information regarding the company's financial status." She nodded to James, who began distributing folders to each member. These documents reveal significant discrepancies between the reports you've received and the actual state of Barrett Industries' accounts. This is highly irregular, my mother interjected, her voice sharp. Helen, we agreed you wouldn't participate actively in these meetings anymore. Given your health concerns— My health is excellent, Helen cut in. My memory intact, which is fortunate, as I remember quite clearly where certain funds were supposed to be allocated and where they actually went. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as board members opened their folders. Murmurs spread around the table as they examined the evidence. Concrete, undeniable proof of years of systematic embezzlement. My mother's gaze darted around the table, assessing allies, calculating options. Finding none, she turned her attention to me. I see what's happening here, she said, voice lowered to intimate concern. Olivia, sweetheart, I know these past months have been difficult for you, but this fabricated evidence, it only demonstrates that you're still unwell. I stepped forward, placing my own documentation on the table. These are my original notes from before I was forced out, journal entries made contemporaneously, with my discoveries detailing exactly what I found and when. I met each board member's eyes in turn. I didn't fabricate anything. I simply found the truth, and for that, I was labeled unstable, pushed out of my job, alienated from my family, and nearly committed to a psychiatric facility. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face had gone ashen as he compared the documents before him with my mother's presentation materials. The board chair cleared his throat. Victoria, these allegations are extremely serious. Do you have any response? My mother stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced composure. This is clearly a coordinated attack on my reputation by my mother and daughter, both of whom have demonstrated concerning behavior in recent months. I can explain every transaction flagged in these so-called reports. Including the offshore accounts in your name? Helen asked quietly. The consulting fees paid to non-existent firms? The diverted pension funds? Something shifted in my mother's expression. The calm facade cracking to reveal a glimpse of the desperation beneath. She turned to my father, reaching for his hand. Richard, you know me. Tell them this is absurd. He withdrew his hand slowly, looking at her as if seeing a stranger. I thought I knew you, he said, voice barely audible. But these numbers, these records. Victoria, what have you done? The boardroom erupted in controlled chaos. Urgent. Whispers. Papers being examined. Legal implications assessed. Through it all, my mother stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that might have once made me shrink back. Now, I met it steadily. You did this, she whispered when the noise level allowed her words to remain private. My own daughter. No, I replied calmly. You did this, Mom. I just refused to let it stand. The days following the boardroom confrontation unfolded like scenes from someone else's life. Barrett Industries announced an immediate leadership change, with my mother placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Financial auditors descended on headquarters, combing through years of records. The family name that had once opened doors now drew whispers and averted gazes. My mother retreated to the lake house, refusing all contact except through her newly hired criminal defense attorney. The family splintered along fault lines of loyalty and self-preservation, some relatives distancing themselves entirely, others reaching out with carefully worded apologies that felt too little, too late. Did you hear Aunt Susan's calling everyone? Zoe said, curled in the window seat of Helen's living room where I'd temporarily taken residence. Trying to figure out who knew what, when. Damage control. Classic Susan, I replied, sorting through another stack of mail, mostly reporters' requests for interviews I had no intention of giving. Always worried about appearances. Zoe twisted a strand of hair nervously. She called me yesterday, asked if I'd known all along. When I said I hadn't, She suggested that maybe I should distance myself from you and Grandma Helen for my future prospects. I looked up sharply. What did you tell her? A small, fierce smile crossed my sister's face. I told her that distancing myself from the only honest people in this family didn't seem like a good strategy for my future anything. The doorbell interrupted our conversation. Helen answered it, her voice carrying down the hallway as she greeted James Preston. They entered the living room together, Preston carrying his ever-present leather portfolio. The district attorney has made a decision, he announced without preamble. They're offering Victoria a deal: plea to reduce charges, make full restitution, serve minimal jail time. And if she doesn't take it? I asked. They'll prosecute for the full amount. The evidence is overwhelming. She could face up to 20 years. The weight of those words settled over the room. Despite everything, the thought of my mother in prison created a complicated ache beneath my ribs. Anger and vindication tangled, with an unwanted thread of grief. Has she responded to the offer? Helen asked. Preston shook his head. Her attorney requested 48 hours to consider. But there's something else you should know. He hesitated, glancing between us. She's attempting to build a defense claiming mental instability, that the stress of running the company triggered a psychological break that impaired her judgment. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. The very defense she had tried to use against me, she was now claiming for herself. Will it work? Zoe asked. Unlikely, Preston replied. The systematic nature of the fraud, extending over many years, contradicts any claim of temporary impairment. The documentation shows clear, calculated intent. Outside, rain began to fall, streaking the windows with rivulets that distorted the garden view. None of us spoke for several minutes, each processing this latest development in our own way. I received a letter from her this morning, I finally admitted, pulling the unopened envelope from my pocket. I haven't read it yet. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on the envelope, my mother's distinctive handwriting instantly recognizable. Do you want privacy? Helen asked gently. I shook my head. Whatever she has to say, I'd rather not face it alone. With steady hands, I broke the seal and unfolded 3 pages of Victoria's precise script. The letter began without greeting. By the time you read this, you will have won. The company, the family's respect, your grandmother's estate eventually. All of it will be yours, just as you wanted. I hope it brings you the satisfaction you seek. What you and others fail to understand is that everything I did was to protect Barrett Industries. Your grandfather nearly destroyed it once with his reckless expansion. I rebuilt it, stabilized it, saved it from his legacy of mismanagement. The funds I redirected were insurance against future collapse, a security measure, not theft. You've never understood what it takes to maintain a family legacy. The constant vigilance, the necessary compromises, the weight of expectations. You waltzed into the accounting department with your textbook ethics and black and white morality, never having carried the burden I've shouldered for decades. I made choices you cannot comprehend because you've never stood where I stood. When you inevitably face your own impossible decisions one day, perhaps then you'll understand that the world exists in shades of gray, not the simple right and wrong you cling to. I remain your mother. No apology, no remorse, no acknowledgement of the harm she'd caused, only justification wrapped in condescension. I handed the letter to Helen, who read it with a deepening frown before passing it to Zoe. Well, Helen said finally, at least she's consistent. A startled laugh escaped me, releasing some of the tension that had built as I read my mother's words. That's one way to put it. 3 years passed like turning pages in a well-worn book. Barrett Industries stabilized under new leadership, with quarterly profits exceeding pre-scandal levels. My mother accepted the plea deal, serving 18 months in a minimum security facility before moving to Florida, as far from the family. she'd manipulated as possible. The house where I grew up sold to strangers who planted wildflowers where my mother's formal gardens once stood. I found myself at Helen's garden on her birthday, placing fresh peonies on the stone bench that bore her name. She'd passed peacefully in her sleep 6 months after the confrontation, having lived just long enough to see justice served and the family legacy secured. "I got your favorite," I said, arranging the pink blooms. "The ones you said were too wild for proper gardens but perfect for happy ones." The will reading had surprised no one. Helen left everything divided equally between Zoe and me, with specific instructions that the company should continue its commitment to ethical business practices. The final paragraph had made me smile through tears. "To Victoria, I leave my collection of journals documenting our family history, so she might finally understand that true legacy lies not in appearances or bank accounts, but in how we treat those who trust us with their hearts." Dad visits monthly now, our relationship healing slowly. Zoe runs the foundation we created in Helen's name, providing support for victims of family estrangement. And I found purpose in rebuilding rather than revenge, in creation rather than destruction. The evening light cast long shadows across Helen's garden as I gathered my things. The path ahead held challenges yet unknown, but the ground beneath my feet felt solid in a way it never had before. Not because I'd won some family war, but because I'd found strength I never knew I had, buried beneath the pain, waiting for the chance to grow. If you've stayed with me through this journey, perhaps you've recognized pieces of your own story in mine. Remember, family legacies are not just what we inherit, but what we choose to carry forward. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, unexpected strength, and the power of truth. Like, comment, share,